Hey all, hope all is well. This is the sixth video in the Road to Grandmaster series covering round six of the Bay Area International Tournament I played in January. If you've watched the recent videos, I'm 2.5 out of 5 so far, and I actually just won my first game in round five, defeating Derek O'Connor. So I was sort of feeling myself a little bit and wanted to sort of take that momentum into this next game. Um, my opponent was a guy named Shengkai Peng. No familiarity with him, but I think he's originally from China and just a up and coming player. And those are always difficult to play because you never know whether they're actually the rating that says on the chart, whether they actually just haven't played enough games. So I think he was a FIDE master about a little around 2,300 FIDE, but you never know. He might just be way stronger than that. So especially from China, a lot of the Chinese players actually haven't got a lot of games under their belt that are actually FIDE rated, or a lot of their games actually haven't and or a lot of their games aren't actually in the database, which makes it very difficult to prepare for them. So there's actually sort of notorious for this problem, and well, it's something you just have to reckon with. In any case, I was going to give it what I got. So he played e4, I went c6, indicating a Caro-Kann, and d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight f6. Kind of an unusual and not the most popular setup against the Caro-Kann. It sort of signals that I'm interested in playing a sort of unorthodox line. And after knight takes f6, e takes f6, I played the Tartakower variation. Now, the Tartakower variation has an interesting reputation. On the one hand, it's sort of considered to be relatively solid because, black has this nice wall of pawns on the king side and, gets pretty nice development. The flip side of that is white has a queenside pawn majority as a consequence of the black's double pawns, and because of that, it means that pawn endgames, for instance, are just completely winning for white. So if you imagine that all the pieces from the board except the pawns and the kings are still there, white can just make a passed pawn on the queen side, having essentially 4 versus 3. And that once white's able to just make a passed pawn, then that's just a winning endgame. So that's sort of a thing to be wary of, and something to just consider. Now, the flip side of that, again, is that black has this extra pawn on the king side, and what it really does is this f6 pawn does a really good job of controlling the e5 square. So in many instances, a knight may want to be an anchor and go to e5, and it's not really possible. So that's the benefit. So actually, c3 was played, and I win bishop f5, and bishop d3 takes the queen d7, knight e2, bishop d6, castles, and bishop f4. And I could tell right away from playing after I played, the first, 10 odd moves or so that maybe this wasn't the best system to choose, because white is really just trying to trade as many pieces as possible to get closer and closer to that 4 versus 3 endgame we're talking about. Now, on the flip side, I'm not going to allow him to trade all the pieces, but it's very difficult for black to do anything substantive if there are really more and more exchanges. The one thing I will say about this opening line is after c3, if we back up here, the normal plan and the normal line goes bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, and queen c2. And the idea is that white lines up a battery against the h7 pawn. And after rook e8, knight e2, the line for a long time was like, it was actually g6, I think like knight d7, and then or g6, and then like for a long time white would try this like h4 h5 plan. It'd be really dangerous. So I really was not keen on going for that line because I knew it had a pretty reasonable reputation. So that's why I went for this bishop f5 setup. But it's pretty much just it's a tough position. I mean, on the one hand, I'm not going to get attacked, but on the other hand, white just is trying to trade all these pieces. So I'm pretty much obliged to take something. So, so I didn't play just g6. I played bishop takes d3, and after queen takes d3, I went rook e8. And so I thought rook e8 was a nice idea. Basically, the point is that if I take on f4, then this knight is really active. It might consider going to h5 at some point. Another nice square for that knight is actually rerouting to d3, because on d3 it controls the c5 square and it controls my pawn break. So those were some things to think about. What I decided to do is play rook e8 because now I thought that I'm keeping the tension, and maybe white will release it by taking on d6 for me, and then I can take with the queen and retain some control. So that's what I went for. Rook e8, rook e1 was played again. The theme of trying to trade more pieces, very annoying. I went knight a6, and now bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and rook a d1. And you can just see, like, white is really just trading everything, keeping everything really simple, and it's really going to be hard. I'm not really a significant deal worse or anything, but it's going to be really hard to manufacture something if more and more pieces come off. And I could be in danger of being significantly worse. So I went g6, again, kind of like a waiting move, and a very useful waiting move at that, giving my king an escape square, just saving myself from back rank mates. The other thing I was anticipating is that if a knight comes to g3, it'd be nice for my pawns to cover the f5 and h5 squares. That would be nice hopping points. Queen f3 was played, and now I went queen e6. I thought this was a clever move because it freezes the knight on e2. Note that if the knight moves, I can take on e1 and get 2 rooks for the queen, which would be very favorable. So I thought it was clever to freeze the knight in place there. An argument could have been made for knight c7, and you're going to see why and with the response to queen e6, which was d5. Not like the strongest move in the position or anything, but a move that continues to help white simplify. The point is that after, I can't really ignore this, right? Because d takes c6 is also a problem, and I don't want to shatter my queenside pawn, so I have to take on d5. And after queen takes d5, you can see white's just trying to trade more pieces. And this ending could be a little bit dangerous for me. I mean, like, note that if I play queen takes, for instance, and rook takes, and, you know, let's say I go like, my knight on c7 is lacking squares. So let's say I play b6. White can consider playing king f1, covering the knight on e2. And after a move like knight c5, then going rook e d1. And although I'm not like losing here or anything, white could start to take over because white has this 3 versus 2 majority on the queen side that will be easier to mobilize. Definitely easier than my pawn majority on the king side, which is double pawns. And then that combined with the fact that controlling the one really fully open file that matters, the D file, could be a problem. So I really did not want to trade queens there, and you know, really I'm kind of forced to move away. So, or I thought I was. So I went queen b6. Again, just trying to retain some pressure in the position, eyeing the b2 pawn. But again, my opponent Shengkai was keen on trading, so he went queen b3. And yeah, there's nothing here. Note that if I went queen c7, but if I take on b3, you could have a takes b3 and knight c5 attacking the pawn, and then just b4 just hitting me away, knight a4. And sure, it looks like I'm, you know, getting a little bit of pressure, but I just don't believe it's very serious here. I mean, white maybe is, you know, I just believe it's very close to equal. So after queen b3, I went queen c7. And yeah, I mean, maybe that other line, there was something there, but it's just, there's not so much here. So I went queen c7, knight d4, and that was the other thing that was really important, is once the d4 pawn was pushed, this knight has a beautiful anchor in the center of the board and beautiful outpost because the c3 pawn covers the knight on d4. And note that my knight on a6 is really clumsy and, you know, without an outpost. I went rook a d8. An argument, again, could be made for knight c5, but I was wary of queen c4 pinning myself. And again, I don't really want to trade queens. So I went rook a d8. And now queen a4, again, challenging my rook on the e-file, trying to prompt me to trade pieces. So I played rook e5. I thought that was sort of a clever move. At least he's saying, you know what, maybe we'll trade these rooks, but if we do, you're going to help me undouble my pawns, and then maybe I get some imbalance back in the position. Knight f3 was played, makes perfect sense, not trying to help me undouble. And now I played rook takes e1 because I'm going to have to give up one of these rooks here. So rook takes e1, rook takes e1, and then king g7, just tucking my king away. The one thing about this structure that I like in the Tartakower Caro-Kann is the king is really, really secure behind this wall of pawns, and it's shielded from checks. And so because of that, I kind of have a free hand to do a bunch of different things. So that was pretty much my. I'm not better here at all. I'm trying to get some imbalance, but at least my king is really secure. So knight d4 again, really, really clever move, shutting my rook down on the one file where I might have some exertion. And it's really hard to do anything with this knight, just anchored firmly in the center. My rook doesn't really have a file. So I went h5, trying to improve my position on the king side, maybe taking a little bit more space. h3 was played, good move by white, just giving white an escape square. And then queen d6. Just trying to, consolidate my queen's position a little bit more. Queen c4, or queen b5, excuse me, attacking b7. Rook d7, defending. Rook e3. And now I had to be a little bit wary here because I already could see an idea like the rook coming to g3, swinging over, and then knight f5, a knight f5 check. If my king is pinned, if my pawn is pinned to the king, I saw that as an idea. But I went knight c7, which I thought was interesting. The idea was that I'm hitting the queen, and if queen takes b7, I have knight d5 winning an exchange because of this. The rook and the queen are both under attack. And note here that if knight f5 check, I did look this far. If g takes f5, which I'd have to do because of this fork, and rook g3 check, you might say, oh no, now I actually have queen takes g3, which is a nice intermediate move, and I can pick off the queen next. And if queen takes d7, I can just go back up a knight. So I did see some things. So knight c7, queen e2 was played, just going back. And now knight d5, redeploying my knight. And now rook e8. I wasn't sure what the idea was rook e8 was, but it's kind of just probing a little bit. I went knight c7, challenging that rook. Rook e3 back. And now a6. You might say, why didn't you go knight d5? Well, the reason I didn't go knight d5 is because I didn't want a repetition, so I just played a6. a4. And now b5. b5 is kind of a speculative move, because the point is if I want to create some type of confusion in this position, I can't continue to trade pawns, and I won't get anywhere that way. The idea with b5 is that I really wanted to undermine this knight, which is kind of the bane of my existence right now. If this knight could be moved from this square, I thought maybe I could get something on the d file. So the point with b5 was to play b4 and ultimately undermine the protection of the knight with the pawn on the c3 square. So that was the idea. But again, this just helps white trade further. So rook d3 was played. And by the way, note that the b5 pawn is immune. It looks like there's two attackers and one defender, but after knight takes b5, my trick was I have this nice intermediate queen d1 check. And I trade the queens and then take the knight. So if queen takes d1, I play rook takes check, king h2, and then take the knight with winning position. And if white goes king h2, same thing, and then take the knight. So that was the idea there. So takes, rook d3 is played, trying to cover that knight. And now rook knight f5 is check as a real threat, discovering, taking advantage of my queen being opposite the rook on d3. So I went king d8, just stepping out of that madness. And then rook d2. Nice move, makes a lot of sense, because now the knight was actually pinned to the rook. So now the rook's on d2, the knight could come back to f3 if needed and cover the rook, and it's protected. So rook d2, rook e7, queen d1, and queen c5. Trying to get something going. I got a little bit excited here because I thought maybe there's a possibility of my knight coming to f4 like that, and maybe getting something going, but it's just not there. Knight c2 shut my idea down. I went knight e6 thinking, oh, I'm going to come this way. But then rook d5 challenged my queen, and I just don't have enough here. Queen b6, still trying. Queen e2, stopping my knight f4 idea and pinning me. And I really had to be careful here because not only am I pinned now, my rook is pinned to the, my knight is pinned to the rook. Also, my b5 pawn all of a sudden is a target because I push it too far, and it's blockaded too by this knight and pawn. So really had to be super accurate here because all of a sudden I kind of botched my position a little bit, trying to create some imbalance. And I managed to keep it together by playing knight f4 anyway. The point being is that the queen and the rook are attacked, and after taking on e7, no, not queen e6, I have knight takes d5, and I retain the material. But you can see here that like white has pretty much gotten all they can get out of this type of structure from an endgame because they kept trading. They still have the advantage on the queen side, and I have not made any significant inroads on the king side. And so after a few more moves, queen e8 check, king g7, queen e4, knight c7, knight d4, queen c5, queen b7, it just petered out. I actually went f5 here, which is incredibly egregious and could have actually been punished. And white went h4, and I went king f6. And the reason this was all a very bad idea is because now I give a highway on this diagonal for my king. I was talking about how I had this nice pawn wall and was shielded from checks, and now that's not the case. The other thing that I was a little bit concerned about is if I move my knight, for instance, the queen is so well placed here, there's even knight e6 check, pinning my pawn and picking off the queen. So all of a sudden this position, it was very dicey, and after king f6, I actually offered a draw, which my opponent accepted because I really cannot do anything in this position, and now I'm actually in danger of being worse. So kind of an uninspiring game, just from the standpoint of, wanting to try and get something going and not really getting something going. But maybe the opening line was a bit of a poor choice because creating an imbalance in this type of structure with already having a structural defect was kind of difficult. So anyways, I drew this game and was on to the next. And that was it. So thanks for watching. Please consider supporting the channel in the description below, and definitely subscribing. And I'll see you next time. Peace.